Okay, this morning I'm going to be looking at the chart of one Marshall Applewhite. Now, I was hoping to do this more shortly after I did the chart of Jim Jones, because Marshall Applewhite is a American religious cult leader. He was the leader of the Heaven's Gate cult, and he was born 4 days after Jim Jones on the same year in 1931. Jim Jones was born on May 13th of 1931, and Applewhite was born on May 17th of 1931. So this is an interesting case study here into two people who had remarkably similar in some ways, but also very different lives. Born in the United States, Jim Jones was born in Indiana, I believe near Indianapolis, and Marshall Applewhite was born in Spur, Texas. And they both were born to very religious families. So, focusing on Applewhite, here's a little bit of background for those who aren't familiar. He was born on May 17th, 1931. He was an American religious leader, best known as the co-founder and leader of Heaven's Gate, a UFO-based religious movement that culminated in the mass suicide of 39 members, which compares to over 900 people who were murdered essentially by Jim Jones. Uh, Applewhite was born in Spur, Texas, to a Presbyterian minister father and a homemaker mother. He grew up in a deeply religious household that frequently relocated across Texas due to his father's pastoral assignments, according to Grokpedia. Applewhite was a musician and an academic. He had a bachelor's degree in philosophy. He earned a master's degree in music. He served in the U.S. Army Signal Corps from 1954 to 1956. He traveled and was served in Austria and in the United States. He chaired the music department at the University of St. Thomas, and he had an early marriage and children, but he was divorced in the 70s, and he apparently grappled with his sexuality, having some homosexual relationship at one point. In 1972, he was hospitalized in Houston, Texas for a pulmonary embolism, and he met Bonnie Lou Nettles, who was a nurse, and he formed a profound spiritual partnership with her, adopting some pet names, and the two became very religiously entwined. They believe that they were the two witnesses prophesied in the book of Revelation. So they used Christian apocalypticism, New Age spirituality, and extraterrestrial beliefs to make a new sort of transhumanist religion cult. Their cult peaked at about 200 members and then started to fall apart, essentially. But his partner died in the early 80s, I believe, and he continued along this path in this cult. After her death, he became rather more strict and disciplined members of his cult more harshly. Um, his relationship with Nettles was apparently platonic, but they were both really moved by this UFO cargo cult informed by Christian apocalypticism, which um, we see a lot of this today still, this sort of combination of religion with UFOs. And in many ways, Applewhite was way ahead of his time in terms of creating this cult. This was a This was nothing new as well. This in many ways followed earlier New Age ideals and mixed them with Christianity. He was very ascetic. He believed that people needed to transcend human sexuality. Um, he was voluntarily castrated in the mid 90s to align with the group's doctrine of androgynous purity. And about a half a dozen men in his group were actually castrated, which falls in line with galley priests of ancient times. So in 1997, on March 26th, and this has to do with apparently a prophetic understanding of the Hale Bopp comet, the members of the Heaven's Gate cult all committed suicide using a lethal dose of phenobarbital, and all 39 members at that point apparently died and were later found. Okay, so moving to his chart. All right, so James Jones had as I mentioned, he was born just 4 days approximately before this, and he had an ascendant in early Capricorn, I believe. So his would have been right around Applewhite's midheaven. And his moon is in early Aries. And as we can see, Applewhite's ascendant is in early Aries, and his moon had moved to basically be a new moon, nearly conjunct the sun in the final decan of Taurus. Okay, so this is a night chart, and we're going to find that the more powerful planets, so to speak, are Mars ruling the ascendant. Being a night chart, Mars is insect, and the moon is the sect light, and we have Venus in the first house in detriment in the third decan of Aries. His ascendant is, interestingly enough, in the first decan of Aries, and this is generally considered the most martial of all of the decans. This is immediately after the point of the vernal equinox, and this is an energy in which the life force is just beginning to emerge from the ground. It's Aries, so we have a emphasis on this emergence and individuation. The symbol that's often used for this decan is a jet black man with red eyes. He may have a white tunic on, and often later Renaissance versions would show men like in armor and with a sword or something like that. So it's sort of warlike, but I think if you go back to the original ideas that are no longer understood, this is much more of a fertility god archetype. Mars here he's in the night sect, so he has to do with the body. He has to do with things of the body and the conflicts of the body, trauma in the body, and action, very oriented towards physical action. And so this is somebody who's probably extraordinarily active and wants, is very compelled to, in many ways, compelled to dominate his surroundings, and probably had a great deal of neurosis around that, really wanting to maintain dominance over his surroundings, and he was in the army. That didn't seem to be his major interest or what he was called to do, which we will see as the placements that are in his first house are Uranus, and Uranus is in the second decan of Aries, and Venus being in her own decan in the third decan of Aries. So these are very particular archetypes sitting in his first house that are definitely can explain exactly what's these colorings in his life that are often would be confounding to people looking at an Aries rising chart. Like, why is this a musician? Why did this person become a religious leader? Um, and we can look to his Jupiter, and we can look to his 10th house. We'll find things, but in his first house, as I said, we've got the Uranus in the 18th degree near the North Node. Um, so Uranus is thought of as the technology planet, which is not untrue, but I think underneath that, the original meaning of Uranus is the heavens. Uranus actually means the heavens themselves, the outer layer of the universe, according to ancient people. That was sort of like a template that was put in place by the creator god, the paternal mind who lives past space and time, who created the heavens as the most perfect um, representation of his work of creation. So the stars are sort of like the sub demiurges to this paternal mind. Um, so, as we've mentioned, this man was a cult leader, very interested in this transhumanism and the UFO phenomenon, which gives us the gods, basically godlike beings arriving from the deepest space to save us, essentially, which was exactly his very philosophy and religious ideals. Also, it's very interesting that Uranus was castrated. Uranus was a he was castrated by Saturn. Saturn in this chart is in the 10th house in a superior square to um Uranus. So he was actually a castrated man. He castrated himself later in life, which is what the galley priests did to themselves. The older members, after they had procreated, would castrate or, yeah, generally castrate themselves. So, interestingly enough, for all of the veneer of a brand new cutting edge cult talking about UFOs, he was very, very much this archetype of the galley priest. The dragon's head right next to this gives us much more ferocity and intensity in this archetype, and a great deal of shadiness too. The head of the dragon is, of course, the eclipse point. So this is where things are cast. There's a shadow cast over these things, but it's a shadow that creates a lot of activity. So the North Node in the first house in Aries is a pretty kind of crazy, crazy making kind of placement. So, yeah, so this Uranus in the first house, this is in the second decan of Aries, which is all about leadership. It's leadership by example. And as we mentioned, his several members of his cult also castrated themselves. So this was somebody who really took the actual original Uranian mythology, whether he knew about it or not. He lived it, essentially. And then we move to the third decan where his Venus is. And Venus is, as I mentioned, in decan. And this is one of those interesting and not very well known dignities. A planet in dignity, according to um, Benatti, was like a planet that had some sort of special um, innate ability that was not granted through position in society or birth or citizenship. This is something that comes purely from within, but it's a very specialized power that's very specific to this one form of dignity. So, Venus in the third decan of Aries brings a much more artistic and relational oriented flavor to Aries here. And one of the images we would see historically was a man who appears frustrated, who wants to do good, who but cannot, who's is somehow limited or incapable of doing the good things that they want to do. Um, this brings a strong focus on relationships, bringing a lot of charisma. Often the person with this placement will be highly charismatic, but likely unable to maintain relationships since it's just like a fire of attraction and fierce set of beliefs, or it's a Jupiter and Venus ruled decan, so it's also going to have a tendency towards religion, and this double benefic within the rule of a malefic, particularly Mars, gives us that fertility god orientation. So this is often somebody pretty potentially oriented towards sex, maybe even obsessed with it. And so while Venus is in her decan, she has a special power, but she's still in um, either detriment or exile, depending upon which term you prefer. So that gives a sense that she's frustrated, that she doesn't get to do the things that she really wants to do, and she has this very strong Mars martial libido. So this is obviously a male character. So this becomes a very Dionysian focus. And again, this gives you sort of the opposite. It gives you, rather than a embrace of this libidinousness, it gives us a rejection, a very strong rejection of that libidinous, that uh, martial Aryan libido in this territory. And again, a focus on music, a love of music, but he didn't really, he couldn't really do the things with the music that perhaps he wanted to, and he became much more focused on his Jupiterian side. So when we look to Jupiter in his chart, we find it in the fourth house, which is not surprising as he grew up with very religious parents. But this Jupiter in the second decan of Cancer is on is very close to Sirius. It's departing from a conjunction with Sirius, and it's applying to a conjunction with Pluto. So there's most likely some secretive stuff going on in his childhood, some stuff that may be dark and may have served to form his personality. Um, this is Pluto is related to power and control. So Pluto and Jupiter together gives you, a high degree of religiosity and evangelism. In the fourth house, clearly it's something he grew up with. It's at the root of his chart. And also, Sirius is focused very strongly on this idea of otherworldliness, being transcending one's humanity, even becoming like a god. And we found that in Jim Jones as well. He had he spoke of his own personal divinity. He believed, or told his followers at least, that he was in fact a divine being. Now, this combination is in the second decan, which is a Mars and Mercury decan, which are a really strong focus on private communication, on people being able to speak very clearly and honestly together in a very protected way, very much like a cult. And when you have a character like this that's strongly religious, they're going to want to protect their speech. They're going to, anybody who's a successful cult leader needs to set up a lot of protections so that it doesn't really get out exactly what they're doing, because they most likely know that this, while they're trying to bring people in and appear that they're, have a very special relationship with the cult members, they are in fact hazing them and keeping them in this so-called walled garden, as Austin Coppock likes to call this territory. So it's protected speech, but with Pluto there and everything else we know, this is guarded speech and protection of communications within a cult. And this placement is also in a fairly close opposition, applying to an opposition with Saturn, which is in the 10th house, in the third decan of Capricorn. So his midheaven is in the first degree, the first decan, the fourth degree of Capricorn, which is also a Jupiter ruled decan, Jupiter and Saturn ruled. So this is a focus on the rules. His midheaven is in a place where we can think of this as a cave, a place where the baby Zeus was put underground and protected as Saturn roamed around to try and eat him. It also, the individual themselves may also try to eat their children or be troubled with childhood. And his obsession with sex and fertility and castration is extremely Saturnine, and this very much, as I said, in line with ancient religious practices of males castration. Also, that gives us a sense that's a fallen, a decan represented by a fallen planet, and it's the ruler of the sign. So that can give you a very strong sense of oppression or not being allowed by the forces, the powers that be, to express oneself fully. So his actual Saturn is in the third decan, and that's the place of the big chair. That's a place where it's a Sun and Mercury ruled decan, where there's a great deal of power, and the person sitting in that chair makes dictates and is sort of like the CEO or that hidden bureaucrats, the prime minister, who's whatever he says goes. This is also going to be like the Godfather, and the cult leader. Given everything else that we already know, this should be no surprise that in his 10th house we have this extraordinarily powerful castrating Saturn. It can be good for money and leadership. He had a great deal of problems with money. And for that, we would look to his second house, of course. And his second house, we find Mercury in the first decan, which is, ideally fairly good at that sort of thing. The first decan is really oriented towards putting in the work one needs to do for one's seeds to grow. So this person is going to be really focused on setting, tilling the ground, doing the work to try and get seeds to sow, to grow, seeds sown in the ground to grow. That Mercury is in his decan. That is the first decan. It's a Venus Mercury oriented place. Also, very, it's going to be very artistic, um, and probably very practical in terms of use of resources, trying to make sure that the resources are used properly. But given what he was doing, that seems fairly problematic. Um, so his sun and moon, as I mentioned, are in the last decan of Taurus, and both are fairly tightly conjoined to Algol. And this is the most malefic fixed star in the sky. It's an eclipsing binary, very red color. It's the head of the Medusa, and when we think poison, this is perhaps the most poisonous of all of the fixed stars in the sky. A very profound feminine anger orientation, um, very vengeful, and this is you can get your apocalypticism and eschatology and all of that from this placement. Um, and the final decan of Taurus is a Saturn decan, which focuses on what happens if things don't go your way. It's Austin Coppock will often talk about insurance, and mitigating risk here. So this person is going to be really focused on making plans for what happens in the worst case. What do I do if things go wrong? If the feds are going to raid my cult and bring me to prison, what do I do? Well, that gives us the answer too, which is poison. The same answer that Jim Jones had from his sun, which was also in this same decan, sitting pretty much where the moon is in this chart. Taurus is very practical, fairly slow moving, very fixed energy. So probably not, a particularly quick guy in terms of his, cognitive abilities, but a very deep thinker, obviously, somebody who had a great deal of depth and was clearly pulling on archetypal ideas that he probably didn't know about or understand very well. So the ruler of his ascendant is Mars, which is in the fifth house, which brings us this strong focus on sex and children, and sort of creativity, which, this gives us more emphasis on the his career as a creative, as somebody who was uh, a musician, really loved music. His Mars was in a trine relationship to his Venus in that last decan of Aries, but his Mars is in the second decan of Leo, and this is a decan ruled by Jupiter, doubly ruled by Jupiter, and this is where the triumphal general returns from his campaigns, and he is vastly, he's celebrated, but he's also um, warned that he will, this position of victory was interestingly one that came with some degree of humiliation. This people wanted to make sure the individuals remembered that they were mortal, and somebody else would be celebrated as they are someday, so they would eventually be knocked off their pedestal. And that success doesn't necessarily mean that you have great virtue. So this is Mars in a fire sign, which is often rather unstable, potentially having some, can be anger issues there. He's got a real strong, fire thing going on with the fire in the first house and the ruler of the ascendant in the fire sign, which, this gives us somebody who may well have a temper, Might be able to hide it, but probably has this great sense of oppression, having been oppressed, or somehow not being frustrated. And so when we look, this is a cult leader, so we want to look at the ninth house for our beliefs, which of course is Sagittarius. He's a Aries rising chart. So the ruler of the ninth is Jupiter in the fourth. And everything I mentioned about Jupiter is going to be strongly reflected in his beliefs. And he's so his third house too. We'll find his sort of communication with his the cult members, the people who are his followers, those who are close to him, are going to feel his third house. And third house is Gemini, ruled by that Mercury in the second house. So he probably was very focused on resources, trying to get resources. We do know that he stole credit cards from cult members and went to jail. He stole a car and went to jail for that. So he had a lot of legal problems. And again, going back to his first house, given that we have Rahu, the head of the dragon there, that would totally explain a lot of that, his sort of criminal nature, having that Mars ruling that in the fifth house, that kind of reinforces that idea that he feels like he's some sort of hero, a champion. Um, so yeah, and then he has Neptune in the sixth house, which in Virgo. So that his daily practice, his routine was probably pretty weird. He probably did a lot of very strange things regularly. Um, Maintained a life that was informed by this otherworldly archetype in the sixth house. So, all right, so that's it for Marshall Applewhite. A very interesting contrast to Jim Jones, the one of the last charts that I did.